Okay. Okay. So as I was saying, I was thinking who would be on the short list of people that I'd be most interested in talking to about training, and you were chief on that list. And I think this will be the first episode, and I'm happy to have you here, Hamish Bond.
G'day. Yeah, no, happy to be here. It's it's one of those things, I guess you accumulate little bits of info along the way. And I've been asked to do a few podcasts. I haven't done many, but I've picked up a few tidbits from the stuff that you've put out into the webosphere, and I figure, yeah, I'm happy to give back a little bit
Yeah.
as well. But yeah, largely have avoided this medium. Not, no, I haven't avoided it, but I just sort of, yeah, wanted, I guess, do it justice, I
Yeah.
suppose.
And I appreciate that. Do you think is it about keeping secrets, or is it about not wanting to, just not be bothered? Or whereas you think some of the,
Oh, I mean, a little bit, but I think it's probably just things that I think are just going to be a generic
yeah,
repeat and sort of scratch the surface. Whereas from what I've followed, the information and bits and pieces that you've put out, I feel as though your knowledge is, well, I know that your knowledge is superior to mine in most areas. Obviously, I'll have a different slant on some things, but I guess you'll probably challenge my thinking a little bit more, or make me think a little bit more, which is then intrigues me more to get involved.
yeah. Well, I hope if it should be a rewarding chat for us. And if it is, then it likely will be for other people. And for everyone, anyone listening or watching for that matter, I just want to go through some of your career highlights for context for non-rowers. There'll be rowers that are likely listening to this, but also I can imagine a menagerie of other people that are coming from strength sports or who knows where. But it's a pretty comprehensive list. So just brace yourselves. Uh, Born in 1986 in Dunedin in New Zealand. First senior team as a 20-year-old in 2006. That was in the four.
Correct.
Okay. And then waited a whole year to become a world champion in the sport of rowing in the men's four in 2007. And then world champion in the pair 2008, no,
Nine.
2009, 10, and 11, and then 13,
Yeah.
14, 15.
Yeah.
Cox pair in 2014.
Yeah.
Olympic champion in the pair in 2012 and 2016.
Correct.
Had a little break from rowing just to
Hmm.
play around with, and that was, by the way, just to digress slightly, made perfect sense to me. It's like, oh, you want to know what you can do,
Mm.
right? Um, Bronze medal in cycling in the time trial at the 2018 Commonwealth Games. So quite a break from rowing. And then back to rowing, Olympics postponed by a year, which helped. Again, Olympic champion this time in the men's eight. And then for the next chapter, into cycling, which conveniently has adopted in the America's Cup pedal power so you joined Team New Zealand as a cyclor and was part of the team that won the 2024 America's Cup. You have four children. How old are
6, 5, 3, and 7 months.
they? It does seem like that. That seems like a lot in,
Yeah.
uh, in the last few years or in the last decade or two. These are necessary benchmarks because you want to hear it from the horse's mouth.
Yeah.
Uh, 2K, PB, Concept 2, no funny business. Lifetime,
543. 543.
543 at what body weight?
90-ish.
Okay, pretty nifty.
91.
Yeah,
91, 92.
okay. Um, 5K or 6K? You guys were doing 6Ks?
No, we were 5Ks.
Yeah,
To be honest, I couldn't give you my exact time, but 15 teens, 15 mid-teens
okay.
is off the top of my head. So I don't think I tapped that one out. We always did the 5K probably 1 or 2 months back into our season. So that was November, I'd only been training a couple of months. And once I got to like the fight, I don't know, for those who know, to me, a 5K probably hurts more than, like it hurts as much as a 2K, but it just hurts for longer. So I
Yeah.
think a 5K is almost harder in some respects than a 2K. So once I got to a level where I could beat pretty much everyone except for Eric,
Yeah.
I would kind of just phone my 5K in, to be honest.
Sure. Yeah. Like
Yeah,
a solid phone it in means you're still going very, very hard, but
yeah,
there's not a
yeah.
lot of
I'm not doing
anticipation.
specific training
Yeah.
sessions and that sort of thing, which I appreciate. Like Eric would go for those things on occasion, and yeah, I just didn't have the. I was too chicken, I guess.
Well, as someone that focused on distances other than 2K, I think you go where you can find success some of the time.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
the 2K is, as it's the benchmark, not only within a program, but everywhere at all time, it's just more significant than the 5K for most people most of the time. But if you can shine over there, then that says something, especially because of the extent to which the aerobic system underpins 2K
mm,
performance. It's far more relevant than a 500 or a 1K for that reason.
yeah. Well, I think 2K. I obviously attacked 2K. I think from an aerobic side more as from an explosive power. I think you can attack it from two sides.
Yeah.
And you see that different athletes who can rip out an amazing 500 can hang on for 2K,
Mhm.
and then more the likes of me who are quite strong aerobically. I think 2K was getting about as short as I could put in a world class score. So
Yeah. Do you
yeah, I
remember
think
a
I got a lot
500,
out of it.
a flat 500 or
I think
1K
I
anywhere in there?
only ever did a flat 500 once, and I got like 119.
Yeah.
So I was not like underwhelming in terms of how good some people can be.
Yeah. I find that completely believable, but I also reckon that the correlation between 500-meter performance and 2K on water performance is really, really low. If I think of,
Pretty negligible.
yeah, because you think of
Yeah,
the Jimmies and the Drews
yeah.
historically, especially in sweet boats, I'd imagine even more so.
Well, you might get into it at some point, but I'd also say success on the water 2K is, well, from what I've seen evidenced in the New Zealand team, is somewhat inversely related to ability to lift weights in the gym.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, we will, yeah, we
There
can
will
get
be
into that
outliers. There will
for
be
sure.
outliers for sure.
Yeah,
But yeah, if I'm looking at who are the best people, men and women, that New Zealand has put out, the vast majority of them can't lift for
yeah,
shit.
yeah. That would be if I think of Josh Dunkley Smith. He had moments where he
He'd
showed
be
up
all
at the
right.
gym. He was strong,
Yeah,
but not in the way people would conflate.
anticipate.
Yeah, and I think
Yeah,
people would be really disappointed with, they hit 119. And I'm like, yeah, that makes sense. And that was probably maybe 117 or something. But the more training I did for 2K, the more it capped that top end power, which is the
yeah. I genuinely think so. I did that 119 over. Concept 2 did a series of ergs over lockdown, and that was the time I did the one because I wouldn't do it. I
no,
know 500 is going to hurt, so I'm not going to sign up for that particularly voluntarily. But I
no.
think I probably would have done a better one when I was 20 years old
Yeah.
before I trained out all my fast twitch. And I think I remember lifting heavier weights. I think so we did a lot of weight training for Team New Zealand, and I think I lifted, deadlift wise, the same as what I did when I was 20 years old, and just put it on the back and
Yeah.
and grunted
Yeah.
it up.
Yeah.
So yeah, you got to. There's a trade off, I think,
Yeah.
for sure.
And we'll come back around to that.
Mm,
I just want to capture some of the other stats
stats.
that people want
Oh
to
yeah,
know
yep.
because some of these, I mean, these will be historical markers over time. There's only so many people in the history of rowing that have had your success. but I've also had success in other sports. So instead of it being on some message board for someone claiming that you did what when, it was just
Horse's mouth.
yeah, exactly. So any other, because I know there were times with Dono that Noel Donaldson, who I had as a coach for a few seasons, and then you did for Rio, and
Yeah, 4 seasons. Yeah.
right, and yeah, so we both had him for a cycle. He also coached the Awesome Foursome, um, and he gave you guys a little bit more space to do things in a way that was going to allow you to be engaged with the process for another 4 years. And
Mm-hmm.
part of that, it's kind of a sick way to go about it, was to target some world records at some of the, I remember between you and Eric Murray, your pair partner, there was 10Ks, half hours, half marathons, hour pieces. What are the pieces that you targeted that you still think, okay, that was a very good effort. I can hang my hat on that.
I don't think I have any over the longer distance, to be honest. That was really Eric, and I was along for the ride. He was
Sure.
far more jazzed up by, I think, like you said, because he knew he was capable of doing world records. Whereas basically we'd be starting that test, and even if I got a world record, I'd know that Eric would break it 7 minutes, like 10 minutes
Yeah.
later.
Yeah. Yeah.
So,
Yeah. Yeah.
it was going to stand for all of 10
So,
minutes.
yeah.
So no, I do remember I had an honest shout at an hour, and I think I held 137s, 137 per 500 for clarity, something like that. I can't remember what distance that is, but it'll be, if anyone wants to trawl through it, go through Eric's YouTube or
Okay.
something like that. That sort of stuff's out. He used to love posting it.
So, man, we're
Um,
trying to avoid that happening.
yeah,
Just to,
yeah,
but
to avoid the
it is
pain.
funny how these numbers get a little foggy over time.
Yeah, I think where I guess I had a big ability was output whilst not actually straining too much. That's probably been where I've been truly world class in terms of. I used to have this weird one where I found if I could hit it, um, it would be, it would tell me that I'm in good shape, where I try and do 142 splits for an hour under 142 average heart rate.
Yeah.
That was and if I could do that in training, then I'd be like, okay, I'm in good nick.
Yeah.
So I had
Yeah.
some weird things like that, which were pretty independent.
How
We
much do
used to
you think
do,
environmental, because of if you have a heart rate cap,
yeah, yeah.
uh, temperature,
Oh, totally.
caffeine,
Yeah, 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 yeah.
you're
No, I'd be like,
ballparking within a range with that test, with that heart rate.
yeah, it'd only be on a good day that I'd be
Yeah.
able to do that sort of thing. So to be, oh, I've got the fan maxed out,
Yeah. Yeah.
cooling me down.
Yeah.
It's probably an afternoon session where I've had a solid session in the morning, but not too tired.
Sure.
Like
Yeah.
all of those components
Yeah.
coming
Yeah.
together. So no, it's definitely a situational effort. And then I guess in terms of performances, I'd say unfortunately I don't rate the assault bikes accuracy necessarily, but I
Yeah.
think I would be surprised if some of my longer assault bike efforts have been beaten by anyone in the world. But that's probably the only other machine which I've really attacked or
Yeah.
felt that I've been capable of setting some really good times, because it obviously combined cycling. I suppose cycling. What else have I done? I did a half hour on the Concept 2 bike
Yeah.
as hard as I could, and that was 470 watts. So if there's any people who are interested in that,
I'm sure there
that
are.
was I would consider that a solid effort. That was after
Yeah.
2 weeks of isolation training in the middle of the rowing season in the build up to the Tokyo Olympics. And then for the America's Cup this year, I clocked over 500 watts for 20 minutes. So that's about me, to be honest, in terms of maximum stats.
How did that rate on the team?
I was the top endurance,
Yeah.
but yeah, I mean, it turned out that endurance aerobic capacity was probably the most important component, but we definitely had to train some sprintability, and we did have guys who specialised, I guess, more in that sort of sprint recover effort. So we combined a team that sort of covered bases, but yeah, I was the strongest in terms of that just
Which makes
set
sense.
test.
Yeah,
Yeah, it
I mean
does make
that's
sense.
you're very good at that distance,
Yeah,
and clearly with pedals you can apply almost all
yeah,
your
I'm happy
engine.
to
Yeah,
happy to have weight on the legs.
yeah,
Um,
yeah.
yeah, so no, that worked. That was probably the other thing that I've trained at.
20 for 20 minutes.
Yeah,
And
so I
do
think
you,
that's probably pretty. I'd say in the world of cycling, that's getting up there pretty elite.
yeah.
And yeah, I mean, but in saying that, in a cycling context, that was at like 93, 94 kilos. So there'll be guys out there on the world tour who can do that, but they're probably 80 kilos. So
How much do you think it was
yeah.
the extra few training years versus a few extra kilos, two, three, four, versus the specific training for the, because if you're still improving and you've been tapping around that energy system for a while, and I imagine cycling, especially post London, would have taken on a decent size of the program, but then you kept improving your sustained power output. What do you attribute that to?
Well, when I went cycling after Rio, I kind of did it. In hindsight, I would reverse the way I did it. I crashed. I was only intending on doing it for 2 or 3 months. So I crashed a whole lot of weight and then tried to see how much power I could put out eventually when I took it a bit
Yeah.
further, went a bit further in the sport. Whereas in hindsight, it would have been better to have trained for a little bit at a normal body weight or rowing body weight, see what my maximum output was, and then see how light I could get while sustaining that. So that would have been the way I would have done it in reverse. But I ended up crashing weight and then went well for a couple of months, and then hormones went off a cliff, and then performance started to go down and all sorts of things. So I probably, when I was actually in my true cycling period, I was probably a bit light to
Mhm.
actually get the best out of myself,
Yeah.
potentially. Maybe towards the end I figured it out, but yeah, I think it all adds up. I think having had the accumulated years, it doesn't take long to get back to sort of 95%. That's
Yeah.
what I've found. Because when I stopped rowing, there was a solid 12-month period where I was just training for life, I guess. And then the America's Cup opportunity came up. And I'd been training, but not,
What does training for
just,
life look like?
I was trying
Right?
to hit, I was trying to hit. Well, I've sort of reverted back to it now.
Mm.
I aim for 5 or 6 sessions a week, and just alternate strength and cardio, and a couple of zone 2 sessions, and then one more interval session in the cardio. So I keep it pretty simple, I think, but sometimes simple is good.
Yeah, usually always. How do you, I mean, these are questions that I sort of want to get to because I want to
Topics in
delve.
themselves.
I'm curious about the right now because I'm by most measures on the other side of PBs, PRs in certain distances, yet I have this memory of what the numbers were like when I was training specifically for them. So it's not useful, but it's hard to avoid. That was one of the main reasons that I avoided the bike erg for, it's like I wouldn't be using it to max out. I'd be using it as a training tool, and yet there's this number that has some baggage or something like it. And then I eventually came around to I'm going to get one so I can get over that baggage. So do you have any of that going on, or you just sort of treat it for what it is?
I think I'm still a little bit recent. So, I mean, I only stopped training 2.5 months ago for the America's Cup. So, and I've still maintained, 4 or 5 sessions a week since then. So, I think my fitness is still, I've maintained, I haven't fallen off a cliff and just gone
Yeah.
cold turkey,
And
nothing.
it hangs, especially if you keep
Yeah.
tapping it along.
Yeah. So I'm
Yeah.
sort of halting the decline somewhat. But yeah, I'm not too hung up on it. I think I'm fortunate. I guess I've had the success, I can compartmentalize it and say, look, this is a new, you can't expect to do PB numbers if you're not putting in a dozen plus minimum hours training a week.
Yeah,
If you're literally training 4 hours at best a week,
sure.
then you can't do it. So um, I think it's actually, I find it useful because I have a good understanding of what was possible,
Yeah,
and if it's and again, like I've always gauged my sessions. This is more when I was training proper. You have sort of, I always go by three metrics. I think it's three. You have heart rate, you have perceived exertion, and then you have your watts.
yeah.
So you take that triangle
Triangle.
of,
Yeah,
yeah, of those three things, and you're gauging all of them at the same time, and you work out, and you know what your goal for the session was, and you use those to give you feedback. So if the watts are good, heart rate's a little high, but you're feeling as though it doesn't feel too hard, then roll with it.
yeah.
If your watts are bad, heart rate's high, it feels hard, it's not a good time to push. So
Yeah,
just
that
just
was my
just
yesterday.
roll with
Yeah,
it.
yeah.
Yeah.
The
So you've
triangle,
not,
the triangle of shit when
yeah, yeah,
none of us
nothing's
looking
good.
good. No.
No, no, and that happens. And yeah, that's when I guess, you get to a point where you are smart enough. I think that probably came, oh, that probably didn't come until after I was over 30 years old, where I would say, look, it's not there today, so just get through the session without digging a bigger hole.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
that took a lot of maturity to get to that point.
It does. That's why it takes that. You have to have those experiences, and then, I mean, you had to have the experience of trying to drop weight for cycling because it's a power to weight deal,
Mm,
and so you go about it one way, and it's not. I mean, it's up to you to determine to what extent it's a regret. That doesn't really seem useful, other than, well, now I know better, and maybe you don't get to do that exact thing again. But the benefit of this conversation is maybe someone else, if and when they're in a similar type situation, they want to get their weight down for a sport, maybe reverse the order in which you
you'd
do it.
be, well, I don't know if it's surprising, but there's a number of serious rowers who message me inquiring about a transition to cycling. So I suppose I can offer my 2 cents.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
You can, and there's going to be people out there that they need to drop weight, and they're paying attention to, they want to be a runner or a cyclist or some other sport where I mean, I'm in that situation. I'm
Yeah.
like heavier than I think I'll be the fastest at. And so how do I reconcile both needing to fuel training, but also believing that I would do that in a
Mm.
lighter body? And then there are many approaches like there are to all of these things. And one thing I just wanted to reiterate that you said just before is that you're aware now that with the training volume that you're doing, it's not realistic for you to expect that you would exceed the performances that you were able to produce when you were training 3, 4 times as much. And that makes
Mm.
sense logically. And yet I find that people want to pursue goals that are irrespective of their circumstances.
Yeah.
And so there's a difference between what someone is physically capable of in a vacuum, maybe if they were just a full-time athlete, versus
Mm.
when they have a job and kids and a couple of different niggles, and
Mm.
then that,
Over 40.
yeah, right. And then there's some caveats, but how do people, I guess, again, through conversations like this, people talk about it. I try to emphasize it, but it's not really, I don't think people really want to hear it. And I don't think they want to hear it from me as to why you should think about the circumstances surrounding you before you go all in on a goal that might not make any sense. But then there's this other part of me, and it's like, go for it. So
Mm. Yeah, I'm currently, I don't, I guess I'm halting the decline. And I don't, I guess it's hard for me because I've met a lot of my targets, or goals. I don't need that as a huge
Mm,
motivator. I think all I'm holding up at the moment is sort of longevity and being able to want to stay in good shape and move well.
sure.
And yeah, a lot of the stuff that you preach, I guess, really. And I'm on a learning process with that. So to be honest, I'm not actively seeking. I intend to get more dialed into that in terms of information, but also conscious that you can't just wait. You've got to do something while you find time to learn about that sort of thing. So
Yeah, it's to
uh,
build the plane as you fly it.
yeah,
Especially
yeah,
because
basically.
every decade it's gonna be a different situation. Once your kids are at
Mm.
a different age, you've
Yeah, I
got
can probably
different
do a bit more.
responsibilities. So
Yeah.
or less, you know, because you never know, and then that's you kind of got to roll with it. And I I think we all do gone through this evolution. I've got some performance aspirations at the moment, but those are very much in the context of for either side, they were buffeted with a lot of life, and it didn't make sense in that time to put the foot to the floor. But I believe that I was building attributes and always will be that will be useful when I want to point towards something specific down the line, but that as you get on and your external responsibilities increase, that the frequency at which you can race every weekend when you're in your 20s. And
Mm.
then when you're in your 40s, 50s, 60s. And if you want to keep going, which most people listening to this, watching this, that's what they intend to do. Well, then it can't, well, maybe it can just be you're sort of reaching to one performance goal to the next, but then
Mm.
you're deprioritizing all of the other stuff like feeling good, which I think is no small thing. Um, I also think when your background is as an athlete, that you have to turn that off to an extent. Because for me, if I had to check in with how do I feel this morning? Like I feel tired. Okay. Now, is that information useful? Given what's on the program, because you're in an
It's
A.
a
Yeah,
it's irrelevant at this point. You got to get
yeah.
up and deal with kids. So
Yeah.
um,
So it's like to what extent do you both need to be aware of that, but you also have this skill of being able to completely ignore it. And then there's quite a lot of distance between the two where if you're your own coach, which most people are, you're the one that needs to make the decision about what you're going to do that day and what you're going to aim for.
yeah, I've been quite. I think I will actively avoid. I don't like entering competitions where I can't give a good account of
Sure.
myself, which I think would be fairly. Most athletes are probably the same. So in that respect, I suppose there are. If it's something that I'm not expected to do well in, then that's probably okay. But
What about
yeah,
something where you're expected to do well in, but you know better than most that less
not
likely
going
to
to
be the
happen.
case.
Oh, to be honest, those things are the worst
Yeah,
because
yeah.
everyone assumes, oh yeah, he can row, he can cycle, he could do anything, and it's like, no, this
Uh,
is a Formula One car. It's not just going to go. You take it
yeah,
off rally. It's a big engine, not going to go
yeah,
anywhere though.
yeah.
So yeah, no, it's a mild frustration, but it comes up on occasion, usually at corporate things or something like that. There's just some random challenge which everyone assumes you're going to be great at,
Yeah.
and old Doug out the back smokes you or something, and then
Yeah, that's on the
it's just
table.
humiliating. I
Yeah.
don't think that's your general power ability. We probably fine, but for me, there's things like that that'll come up, and people think, oh, he'll be able to smoke everyone, and then not just some random punter will beat me, and I'll be like, oh, well, that was mildly humiliating, but
Yeah, that does seem
we'll
worse
move on.
than what's on the table for me, but it's not what I get is, especially when I was tackling the 500, 1000 stuff, because it's easy to have a minute challenge on the echo bike or the assault bike or a minute challenge of any sort, clean and jerks. And I just constantly would get sent things on Instagram like, do you want to? And I'm like, I think you would be underwhelmed by my performance in that. And when you're measuring me against, like, I think you should do this because you might be the best in the world. And I don't think that's the case. And then,
Yeah.
so it's just nothing but disappointment and lack of
Mm.
preparation. I reckon I've only gotten decent at things by training. I don't think it's a natural talent, so it's not easily
Yeah.
transferable. But if you give me enough time, I can prepare for it. But mm, that's not what people want, I don't think.
No, I'm saying, yeah, that is some other people assume, oh, what's next? Do triathlon, Ironman. It's like, well, no, well, everything I've done, I've sort of thought that's roughly in my wheelhouse. If I
Yeah,
give it a bit of time, I can do that. But running or something is way outside my wheelhouse. It's not,
yeah,
I mean, I guess you'd have the heart and lungs for it, but there's a lot of other stuff that's going to need to be tuned before I can be
yeah.
good at that. And like
Especially
you
when
say,
the
probably
standard
15 kilos.
is like that you would be measured against.
Oh yeah, you're measured against Kipchoge, but
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
you may as well just be some punter off the street. Like that's literally where you'd be starting.
Yeah, yeah. In many ways, there'd be punters off the street that are because they're trained up in,
Better, yeah,
yeah, they're better. And then I would
yeah,
look forward to seeing with you how this evolves over time because in the sustenance of training over time, the allure of feeling good is to me and longevity, especially when you have kids, that starts to become like I honestly didn't think about it until my son arrived. I was 38, and until then, longevity had I would do things with the knowledge that this probably won't help longevity, and I'd do it willingly because that wasn't a concern. And then things change over time. So
mm,
if you know that you're going to keep training, you want to feel good, you want to both stay alive and keep training for that's I guess health span. But sometimes events help that process because they do give something to orient your training towards. It's a little bit more specific in the interim, and then when that's the case, could just be a fun run for us. It was my wife signed me up for. I'm looking at it right now. A mountain that's just across the way from us, and there's a race
mm,
one day a year, and I'd done almost no running, and I went hard enough that I was spewing before the finish line. So
okay,
give you a sense of the effort, and then how do you go about that with your competitiveness? Is
yeah.
that you can't turn that off even if you're in principle training for something else.
Yeah, well, that's, I guess, like I say, avoid that situation for now. But it'd be interesting, like I say, I'm not sure how long, like I say, feeling good, longevity, having those as a target, how long that will sustain motivation. But I think it will for a wee while. We'll see.
Yeah, well, so that could be the next conversation. I want to take it back to the start because I thought I'd wrap it up with some of the stuff that you're doing now. But I think I'm interested to know. So when did you start training? So I guess there's a lot of people they do sport, soccer, and they go to training or practice, and then they go home, and then there's the training you do outside of that, and then it all sort of coalesces in this training. But for me, it was when I started to take ownership of getting better outside of just the people that I was in teams with. So when did that happen for you? And what do you remember about it? And do you remember what your motivation was?
Yeah, I see that motivation. That's a big. That's what I find at the moment. Well, on the odd occasion, I have done a talk, or a primary question is, what is your what? How do you stay motivated? To push and do this? It's like, well, early on, the reality was, you can only sort of pick this up in hindsight. I basically tied my whole sense of self worth to being a good rower as a slightly probably insecure teenage boy who was probably a bit shy, didn't talk to girls. Thought, maybe if I make myself a really good rower, this will help me out. So basically tied my whole self worth to that. So that's
Yeah,
actually turned out to be a pretty good motivator for the
yeah,
first 10 years.
yeah,
But
yeah.
if I'm not good at this, then I can't hang my head on anything.
You say 10 years, but
Um,
how long do you think it was before there was a turning of the quarter?
It depends, I guess, when you say I started, and that takes it back to what you said. So I started rowing when I was 13 years old at high school. And I wasn't the best at that age. The best person is the person who goes through puberty first,
Yeah.
basically. That's always the best rower, and when you're 13, 14, 15, 16. And I think almost fortunately, I was a more late developer, which meant that I had to be good. I had to train, and I had to try and, I guess, probably get better technically, listen, follow my coach's instruction, that sort of thing. Um, but it would have been quite early on when I went above and beyond, I guess, what the squad would have done. And I say that I was probably 15, I reckon, when I convinced, so I was a boarder at high school,
Yeah.
went to boarding school. And I think I was about 15 when I convinced my parents to buy a Concept 2 rowing machine that I could have at home. So when I was at home for school holidays, I could train on the rowing machine because we lived out in the country and nowhere near water. So yeah, that was probably about 15 when I started to do things that were above and beyond your normal school participant of that age. This was certainly, it might be normal now, but that wasn't normal at my school at that time. And then, yeah, probably my later school years, 16 or 17, 18. We call it under 17, under 18 it was back then. That's when I was probably the best rower at my high school. And that was purely down to putting more effort in, taking it more seriously, and then started to go through puberty, I guess, at a later time and got a bit bigger and sort of overtook everyone. I took it seriously early, I guess.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. You
I
must
can't,
have to be in the senior team at 20, and and it's not because you've got a lot of strength, that you could have
nah.
lent on at the time. So
Yeah, like I was already relying, like I was already in aerobic. I was leaning on aerobic at that age, which is possibly, yeah, that's possibly a bit unusual. And in hindsight, there's probably people might develop that a little bit later.
yeah.
Um,
Do you remember what your
but
2K was towards the end of school? And then
yeah,
what it
so
was on your first senior team, so say 17, 18, and 20?
yeah, I can remember those ones.
Yeah.
So I did 2 years of junior worlds in the eight with no real success on the water. My first year, I think I did 6:18, which
Yeah.
is probably a pretty average junior time by these
But how
current
much did you
standards.
weigh?
Well, it would have been 83 or 4 kilos, so
Yeah.
probably decent for power
Yeah. Yeah.
weight.
Yeah.
And then my second year in juniors, so I would have been 18 years old. I did 6:03. And then my first year out of high school, so 19 years old, I did under 23s and I did 5:57, I think,
Mm, mm.
under 23s.
That's
And then
heavy.
my next year was my first year in the senior team in 2006. As you say, I was 20 years old and I did 5:52, I think, or
Hmm.
5:53. So that was where because in the junior team, my first year in the junior team, I was probably, oh, to be fair, my school rowing coach is sort of the patron saint of New Zealand rowing. So
Mm.
he probably lent on the junior selectors a little bit, or they, when my coach from high school, Fred, he said, "Oh, look, Hamish is all right. The junior selectors." I think that's, yeah. To be fair, junior selection, I don't know how you pick. Other than ergs, I don't know how you
Picking
select
crews
that.
in picking crews in general, that's
Yeah,
conversation for another time, but to me,
yeah,
far more art than
yeah,
science.
yeah,
But
for
it doesn't
sure.
help when if you don't really know the bodies, and if you've got a country like New Zealand or Australia for that matter, and everyone's,
All over the show.
how do they pick rep boats from just that? You have
Yeah,
trials, but it is a lot
yeah,
of reputation.
it's a crapshoot. Um, yeah, no, I probably the first one was my coach's reputation, and then the second one was more my reputation. But that was where I went. I suppose I didn't go down the. That was where I guess a lot of talented athletes at high school lose their way those first years out of school, because things become more difficult and there's far more distractions and opportunities. So I was able to I lived a particularly monastic existence in those first years out of school, which was, yeah, not great for me socially potentially, but
Sure.
I could have done it more balanced, I
Yeah.
guess.
Yeah.
There's people
Yeah.
who did do it more balanced, but I chose to not do it particularly
Yeah.
balanced, and I devoted my more or less my entire existence to rowing, and probably my not quite my last year of school, but those first 2 or 3 years out of school, everything, my whole world was oriented towards getting better at rowing. And I did. I got better than anyone, I guess, all the peers my age. And like I said, found my way into the senior team, which was not easy at 20 years old,
No.
with guys who are bigger, stronger. But yeah, again, like I found you're stubborn, and if you start to turn them over on the erg or on the water and you start beating them, then that gets to you get respect eventually.
Yeah. This is a somewhat loaded question because what you're describing is uh, what I felt inclined towards doing, but then there was this expectation of, uni, and I also wasn't as good as you were quite at that age. Had won some races, but there was going to be a little bit more between when I could be on the senior team and when I'd finished school. So I went to college and it was great, and we raced and did pretty well, and it was a pretty high standard. But there's also that wasn't the focus. They even told us that when we get this, like academics is your number one priority. And you're like, I thought, yeah, Roger, great. I'm here to row, so I'll do that. And
Yeah,
then over time, it becomes pretty clear that that has to be the case because the other guys in your team, they're there to be astrophysicists
yeah,
or finance guys or whatever. They take that very seriously, and they also take rowing very seriously. Everything's a little bit more compartmentalized, but I always had a sense of like, well, I want to go all in. That's what I felt. And so I think now with kids and what would I do? How would I steer them if I know, hey, there's a chance it doesn't come off in a sport like rowing where there's no financial benefit,
financial.
most likely. Even if you are the best in the world at it, you might not get left with anything on the other end other than people you've met,
Satisfaction.
the satisfaction, the experience, there's a lot. It's not nothing, but it's
You're
not
not Roger
small.
Federer.
Right, no, or anything like it. Which my mum would be like, why not? Why couldn't you be good at golf
Golf.
or tennis
Yeah.
and there's a long list of reasons why why I
Why?
couldn't be. Yeah. But I think how would I encourage someone now? And it would be more all in. I would rather than more balance. So do you actually think I could have done that with more balance and should have, or maybe I just could have and didn't, but I didn't because that's not who I was at the time.
Yeah, I don't regret going all in. And when I say all in, like I still went to university sort of semi part time, and ended up with a degree. It took me 8 years to do my 4 year degree. So, like I was aware that I'm not putting all my chips on
Yeah,
rowing. Like
yeah,
I need a backup plan. So,
yeah. But when you wake up
but
in the
but I
morning,
would, yeah, I
you
was thinking
know,
about,
yeah,
yeah,
yeah. What am I
I wasn't,
about? Yeah,
yeah. And again, sort of compartmentalize. And fortunately, I was pretty good at cramming, so I didn't worry about schoolwork much until I really had to worry about it. But
yep,
again, I wasn't at Princeton or Yale where I probably would have had to worry about it to actually get decent marks. But no, the whole college thing, you're a similar age to me. The college thing hadn't really come about in New Zealand at that point.
yeah.
Maybe America had only realised gone as far
I
as
think
Australia on the
seriously, just
map
yeah,
and hadn't
yeah,
quite reached New Zealand at that point.
yeah.
So it was
Especially if you
probably
compare
only
it to
in,
now, it's just gangbusters.
yeah, yeah. It was
Yeah,
only 2 or 3. It was probably 2 or 3 years after I was that age that going to America became a thing. And the reality is, if that was an option when I was that age, I think I probably would have gone
yeah,
because it is a huge opportunity. And I've had a number of people ask me subsequent, kids coming out of school. I've got this opportunity. Should I go? And I'm like, realistically, yeah. I mean, I
Yeah.
would.
Yeah.
It's life
That is a good point.
experience.
I probably would.
Um,
I not only would I do. So
yeah,
I guess it depends
I
on the person a little bit and what their all of the factors.
yeah. If the education side of it and the opportunities that might bring about, as if you don't have any interest in that whatsoever, and you're 100% rowing or nothing, then okay, then maybe that's not for you. But if it holds a bit of an interest, I think it can be done. And there's been so many cases now of where people have gone down that route, and I think it's definitely no worse training than a development program in a national system. I don't think in
It's
the vast
less
majority of cases,
volume and
which might be a good thing if
might
you're.
be. Yeah.
It depends on the athlete, like I think a lot of athletes they probably can't really tolerate um, the volume of a national system at that young age. Yeah,
That's
like
a good
I
point.
was fortunate. Well, my high school coach, he was the selector of the New Zealand eights through the 70s and 80s, where New Zealand
Is it
was probably
Harry
no, not Harry Mann. Fred Strawn is his name. So he was the
Sean?
selector. Harry Mann was the coach. But that meant that Fred was more or less coaching me like a national
Yeah.
squad athlete when I
Mhm.
was 17 or 18. So that volume, it was a step up for sure, but it wasn't a wild leap.
Yeah.
And yeah, I sort of witnessed that firsthand when we had the Olympics and we had Dan Williamson come back from Yale, who he'd won
Mm.
the eights championship there, I think
Unrose.
two times,
Yeah.
and came back to our system and the volume. And to be fair, I don't think we actually had a massively high volume program in our eight.
That cycle.
But
Yeah.
it was but it was a huge. Well, actually, that's probably not true. I didn't do the high volume.
Yeah. Yeah.
The other guys in the eight probably did. Um,
Is that because of when you
but
came back or because you were getting like a older oarsman treatment?
yeah, definitely older oarsman treatment.
Yeah.
Um, and I was lucky. We had some really good reserves that would do sessions in the eight for me. So
Well,
yeah, it was definitely
your
stage
back
five.
was playing up.
No, back or ribs. It was just in general.
I remember having a chat with you about the ribs at one stage.
I had ribs for. I had periods where I was good, but yeah, ribs were like a factor. I yeah, uh, it's just doing dumb stuff. That's generally how you get a sore rib.
Yeah,
Um,
did dumb stuff in terms of
Too
load.
much. Yeah, it was usually. I mean, when I was younger, with Dick Tonks, who some people may know, he was our coach between in the pair from our first Olympic cycle, and renowned as a very hard trainer. And that was where I really learnt to suffer and to sustain a high volume. But I would have rib fractures. Uh, there's so many facets to it. Like part of it was young, getting used to the volume. Part of it was I don't think our boat was set up
Mm.
particularly well, and that can have a factor at the high end of rowing. If when you're trying to do big miles in a boat that could be tuned better for your physique,
Yeah.
that's part of it. So there was a number of factors there.
Nutrition especially when you're doing that
Probably, yeah.
volume.
I didn't know. I didn't know. I knew about nutrition, but I would have been probably underfueled. Reality.
Yeah.
Um, and wasn't probably I just accumulated knowledge in terms of nutrition, but it wasn't until I went cycling and tried to lose a whole lot of weight that you actually learn um, a lot more about nutrition,
Yeah.
because you have to know when you're trying to strip weight, or
Yeah.
if you're
Unless,
trying to do
yeah.
it semi smart.
Yeah,
I mean,
or
I
you're a person that just is already above their set point for whatever reason, and they have like a metabolism that
hmm,
they're more likely to drop weight than maintain it, but or build it. But
yeah,
yeah, I mean, for sure, if you're trying to move past your set point in any direction, that's when you learn because
yeah,
you have to provide
yeah,
a different stimulus,
yeah,
otherwise there's not going to be any
yes,
change.
you just yeah. So I mean, throughout that period in rowing, Eric was obviously heavier than me, um, stronger than me on most metrics, and I was in the stern of the boat. So, anyone who knows rowing, typically in the bow of a pier, they have leverage. So I had a bigger guy, stronger guy in the bow, and I was trying to hold him straight at 10 kilos less body weight. So there's certain pressures involved with that. And I used to have to more or less competitively eat throughout the season to
Yeah.
hold up body weight. So that was ironically why I found it quite easy to lose weight, because that was a change in itself. Oh, hey, I don't have to force feed myself anymore. So,
How much do you
but
weigh
if I just
now?
now I'm about 95, so I'm a
Okay.
little bit heavier than what I was when I was. Basically, I'm the same weight as what I was for America's Cup.
Yeah.
Um, yeah,
Yeah.
which
Um,
we had a weight of 94 kilos on the boat that I had to be. So yeah,
that's what it is.
that's my
Yeah.
new homeostasis now.
Yeah. 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 Well, we'll see over time.
Mm.
See where you consolidate. Just to take it back to school, there's one thing I wanted to know at the time, given that you had, someone could be decent at school, but they're so separated from the system and anyone involved with it, whereas you had some very relevant people within New Zealand rowing historically right around you. Was anyone saying, hey, maybe keep going with this because you might be decent, or is it just implied based on what you're doing on a daily basis?
Yeah, I don't think Fred saw me. Yeah, he's so my coach. He's still alive, so he was in his late 70s, early 80s when he was coaching me, and I think he's 102 or three now. Um,
Is
so I don't think he saw me as any protege or anything at that point. And he was the type of coach which I think any athlete will come across if they try. You would have to try particularly hard that he will match the effort that you put in. He will match, or and that's how if I push this way, he'll push that way, and we'll take off. So he could see that I was into it. I was doing extra ergs. I was turning up, so
Yeah.
he would
Yeah.
put more effort into coaching and helping me. So he wasn't a particularly vocal guy. Like he's gruff. He's like, oh, you'd think he'd just done 60 years on the docks or on a fishing
Yeah.
boat or something like that.
Yeah.
That's his sort of type of personality. Um, but yeah, he didn't have a ceiling on expectation, I suppose,
Yeah.
and he just used to lay wee carrots. Because at my high school 5 years earlier, a guy who ended up being in the senior four with Carl Meyer,
Mm.
he'd come through the system, and Carl was a renowned, really hard trainer, and he'd just drop, oh, Carl would do that.
Yeah.
So it's
Yeah.
like these wee scraps along the
Yeah.
way, and I'd be like, oh yeah,
Yeah,
okay, old man,
they'll do that.
yeah,
That'll
yeah.
do it. He
So
seems
that's
pretty,
what needed.
I don't know, yeah, instrumental, or I mean, because the genesis, something happened to happen within you, but it does seem really useful to have had the environment that you were in, even if you had seemingly elevated yourself amongst you know, the guys in your school at that time based on your willingness to do the extra stuff.
Yeah, I mean, he's hugely instrumental, but it's not as though it needed both, I suppose. He was there, I
Yeah.
was prepared to work,
Yeah.
and his particular way worked for me, I suppose. I had to learn a lot. Like he wasn't, I learned to set up a boat early. I learned how to measure pitch, change pitch,
Yeah.
what effect that has on the boat. Like I learned that stuff at school, which is not particularly normal, I
No, most
suppose.
senior rowers wouldn't know how to do that.
And no, I think Eric would prefer I didn't know how to
Yeah.
do pitch,
Yeah.
because I'd
Yeah.
start scrapping over half a degree here or there.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. That can happen.
uh, yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
definitely can.
Yeah.
Um, no, he was very instrumental, but I think the biggest thing was that I'd say it's more of a challenge to come from in some respects, from a structured, well-funded, say, private school system, because everything's handed to you on a plate at school.
Yeah.
Okay, you've got to still go to work and you've got to train, but there's, all the mums there with the ice buns and the barbecue and the boats, you've got
Yeah.
the Swiss trailer and the everything sort of easy. Whereas I definitely, through my generation in New Zealand rowing, all the successful athletes were from small schools, black block of nowhere, who had learned to do things themselves. They knew how to
Yeah.
train themselves. They were self-motivated. They can load and de-rig a boat, load it on the trailer, like do it. And that's where they make the transition out of school,
Mm.
because it's not such a leap to that club level where, oh, hey, I've got to do stuff for myself, or
Mhm.
I need to come up with a plan, or like I need to get myself to a regatta and that sort of
Yeah.
thing. So um, that was, I think, very useful for me, was being quite self-sufficient, I suppose, but also having the godfather there if I needed to ask a question.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's both of those things.
Yeah.
It's never one thing, and there's probably other factors at the time that contributed, but I I wonder what it would be like for you if you were you with all the same enthusiasm, but you probably would have still ended up more or less where you did. But you can imagine a world in which you weren't taught any of those things at school, and then you either figure it out later or you don't. You're the same person with the same
Mm.
ingredients, so you would have. I believe you would have got there anyway, but it certainly helped.
It's hard to say, like you are just a summation, I guess, of all your little experiences along the way. So,
Yeah.
um, yeah, hard to say. But yeah, like I say, my principal motivation was really that I'm going to be a good rower, and in some way that's going to help me. Uh, you didn't literally pin it to self-esteem, but in hindsight, that's pretty much what it was.
How much do you think it was? I mean, both at school, but also over your rowing career, do you think it was the rowing was it about rowing, or is that rowing was a really good vehicle with which to push hard and express yourself? And it could be from column A and B, but I tend to find that there's some people that they keep rowing and they'll do masters and they talk about getting out in the water and it's a beautiful day, and then there's people that's not why they're in it. So
Yeah, I probably can draw from column A and column B. In terms of the sport itself, I didn't fall into it. Like I say, I was a boarder at school. I wasn't playing any other summer sport when I started high school. Used to play cricket, was no good, so quit. So I mean, I can't say I'm dedicated to everything no matter what.
yeah,
But basically, the seniors at the hostel forced us to try rowing, tried it, and yeah, I wouldn't say I had like for any novice in rowing, the
no,
sport is hard. It
yeah,
sucks. No one's a natural. I don't
no,
think
no,
anyone's a
no, no,
natural off
no,
the bat.
no. It's the one thing I can
So
say with confidence about the sport
yeah,
is that no one's good to begin with.
no.
Yeah.
So I was as duck out of water as much as anyone. So um, or it wasn't a duck to water. But yeah, I don't know. I guess it just became. I don't know if I identify, but there's a fairly linear path of effort in, results out, and I could see I was playing hockey and basketball to a regional level in my early years at high school, but I was more I was more motivated to put the extras into. I was relying on, not, I wouldn't say natural ability, but an ability in the
Yeah.
other sports. Whereas
Yeah.
I was prepared to put the extras into rowing, but I
Yeah.
didn't into those other sports. So yeah, towards the end of high school, I dropped the other sports and just fully focused on rowing. So um, yeah, I think there's multiple ways to skin a cat, and I wouldn't necessarily recommend. Or, yeah, I guess that swings it right back to what would you say get your kids to. I think if they let it, I would I would say, oh look, you can't hang your hat in Thailand. You guys still got to, do your schoolwork, and we're
Yeah.
not going to pick it up and go to a tennis academy in a Florida. I mean, maybe if they're really good,
Yeah.
but we'll
Yeah.
go to an
Yeah. Yeah.
academy in Florida
Yeah.
or whatever. But if they let it, then as long as it's them leading it, then I don't think there is. I don't think you need balance. Like if it's
Yeah.
athlete led,
Yeah.
um, then you can lean into it.
That might be the quote, Hamish Bond, you don't need balance. Like, I think it matters, different stages, what the
Well, and in
conversation looks
saying
like at
that, so
18 versus 12 versus 15, and depending on the sport, depending on the person.
yeah, well, I have had someone who had got really quite angry at me when I started. I don't think she didn't let me finish my point. But when I was talking about a lot of the goats of this, her argument was you do all the different sports, and that's a good basis for getting into elite sport. I was like, yeah, that's fine for some, but if you look at the goat of or the top five of any sport in the world, I would suggest that the vast majority of them have been right into that sport from
Yeah.
a very young age.
Yeah.
So yes, if you're, it depends what level you're targeting, and I don't think it's healthy to say, do a Williams family tennis
Yeah.
academy
Yeah.
from the age
Yeah.
of 5. Like I'm not for that whatsoever, but I'm not saying it's right, but it's an observation that the best people in their given sports are generally come down that route, of
Athlete
being
led,
dedicated.
athlete led would seemingly ameliorate some of the potential for craziness down the line when
Yeah.
they've not been pushed into it. And we can think of notable examples. My favorite, the thing that I think of when I think about early specialization versus not, is that there's this Norwegian principle of generalization, keeping it fun, and yet they're, at least in the summer sports, their best and most notable athlete, Jakob Ingebrigtsen, was elite
Not
and
that.
specialized early. So it's like,
Yeah.
yeah, if you're thinking about being an elite athlete, that might be one thing. If you're thinking about being the best and perhaps the best of all time, then that might be something else
Mm.
entirely. And that's, I think what
I don't
I,
think, I mean, there's not many, I don't think there's probably many athletes that are realistically, I wasn't aiming to be the best of all time at that age. It just sort of creeps up on you. And I'd say that's the same for, I guess there's the odd outlier who perhaps was aiming to be the best of all time at the age of 12, but they might have had a loose hope. But, to have that
yeah.
as a realistic
But what about
motivation at
by
that age
18?
is, nah, nah,
I,
no,
I
no
guess I'm
chance.
thinking in terms of exceptions, but I could think of a bunch of 18-year-olds where that would have been,
Oh, for other sports, for sure.
but you weren't.
Me personally, no,
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 no.
like
Well,
not, yeah.
no, I
I
was
don't
still
think, but
thinking in
that's
terms of, I wonder what sport, even I remember up until 2004 and say 2003, I would have been thinking, I wonder what sport I could be elite at.
mm,
And then in 2004, watched the US guys who I knew saw around the boathouse at Princeton won the gold in the eight, which is the boat that I was most interested in. And I'm like, well, that's, I can,
achievable.
achievable. And then I was like, I should probably just do rowing because I'm decent at it. But never was there a conversation. And I hadn't, yeah, it wasn't really there. I didn't have the build for it. So you convince yourself you can do it. But there are some people where they have an inkling towards clarity of purpose. And there's times in which I wouldn't want a parent because they are concerned about how poor outcomes. They might not make it. They might not be able to make a career out of it. So they're trying to balance them or normalize them into some sort of average person. And at this stage, from a parent perspective, like you steer, yeah, go all in and like at least swing big and all of that. But at the same time, if someone says, should I go row the US in college, which is going to be a more holistic kind of thing as opposed to stay home and just be a rower, I would suggest that. So maybe I'm still figuring it out.
Mm, yeah, no, not going to know until you get there.
Yeah, and for you, well, it's not for us anymore, really. Like at some level, but mostly it's about anyone that's listening and within the context of their lives, and then our kids and the kids of the people that are listening to this. I wanted to know when, during phases of training, despite you having a lot of success, there's times in which things would have gone well and times when they wouldn't have. And I'm when you think back of, oh, it went well and it was for these reasons, can you remember any patches in particular where the effort and the results were proportionate and you're in harmony? And I'd imagine you would have had a few of those.
Um, I I've said I don't think I didn't know what it was that I couldn't articulate how to row a boat fast until probably 2011. And then, okay, that's again only my point of view of how to row a boat fast. And like that, it still goes back to listening to Drew with his random thoughts and podcasts that he was
Yeah.
putting out in the early 2010s. Um, yeah, and it's on YouTube. But when he's talking about how to make the boat go faster or something,
Yeah, it doesn't make the boat
and
go faster.
yeah, it does, yeah,
Yeah.
YouTube that, and that was pretty foundational for me.
Yeah.
And I was at that point I was three-time world champion, but shit, no one's described rowing to me like that before.
Yeah.
I've never had a coach. Yeah, the coach is saying, yeah, put your catch in. I'm like, yeah, sure, I'll put my catch in.
Yeah.
Just that real. And I think there's just again like a type. That was one discrepancy between the Australian system and our system. I think was that we didn't have those guys that could pass that down. So obviously someone sort of learned. I don't know if I don't know James that well. I haven't spoken to him about this, but I don't know if he was the godfather of sort of that style of rowing that then got passed down to Drew, which then he passed down to the guys in the four and that sort of thing. I don't know if he was the starting point or if there was someone above, before him. But we didn't really have that in the New Zealand rowing team. We didn't have the old guys with experience with medals. So we sort of had to learn that
Do
for
you think
ourselves.
that's
So
in
those
sweet
first,
boats? Because you had Rob, but it's also,
yeah, but Rob was just
yeah, yeah. It's not
he's
relatable.
on a different planet.
Yeah.
Yeah, so
But Jimmy's a bit like that as
nothing.
well. As like a guy that's that size with that sort of touch is very rare.
Yeah, yeah, but he wasn't banging
No,
sub
no,
five
no, he
forty.
he wasn't. He had to do it a whole other way, but
Yeah.
he was, yeah,
Um,
unique to row with.
Yeah. So I think just for him being a rower, being able to describe how a boat can feel, what he did was put in words points of my rowing life where I'd been like, oh, this is going really like what you're talking about. Things are going well. This is a sort of rowing nirvana where it's easy to work hard. I'm working hard, but it feels good to work hard,
Yeah,
which is what we're always sort of looking for in
yeah,
rowing. Like, yeah, hey, everyone's working hard, but sometimes it feels good to work hard, and
yeah,
sometimes it feels like absolute dog shit.
yeah.
So working hard, boats going fast, everything's snowballing in the right direction. But we'd had that, but I wouldn't have been able to. We couldn't replicate it, and that
Mm.
was where we came unstuck. 07 when we were world champions in the four and trying to go again in 08
Yeah.
at the Olympics. We didn't know what it was that we had done well in 07 to then try and replicate it in 08. So,
It was the one year we
yeah,
raced against each other. Oh,
oh,
07.
oh, 07, yeah.
Yeah,
So
my
we
first
just we
senior
just
team.
chanced on a good rhythm and it was going well and we just went from one strength to another. But it was mainly because it felt good to row hard
Yeah,
and that. But then listening to Drew and then developing, Eric was very open to ideas and trying different things. Our coach, not so much, but he was a trainer, not really. If you'd say a coaching is, say, 5 parameters, then yeah, Dick took care of training,
yeah.
setting the program, I guess, kind of dialing in intensity to a degree, but every other facet was entirely up to us. Um, or if it wasn't entirely, then we would just take ownership of it anyway.
Yeah.
Um, so that was when we started developing off the back of Drew's, I guess, words, our own philosophies and ideas of what it may of basically just a few principles of how we feel we make the boat go fast.
Yeah.
and that was when, yeah, I felt as though I could repeat, or I knew what I was looking for. Because I think, yeah, prior to that, I was just sort of stabbing in the dark.
Yeah,
We were training really hard, and that's a great starting point. But other than that, yeah, we were just like 2010, say our World Championships. I don't think we felt good in the boat that whole year, but we
yeah.
just won on grit, guts, and
Fitness.
fitness.
Yeah, yeah,
uh,
yeah. That
and
helps.
that was one we almost lost.
Yeah.
So yeah, after that, I felt, yeah, we had far more of an idea of
2010,
what we
that was in
were aiming for.
Carapiro.
Yeah, so we
Good
only beat
race.
Brazil half a
Anyone that
second.
wants to see a very good race,
Mm,
that's down to the wire with good atmosphere. 2010 men's pair world championships.
mm.
We
Yeah,
must
that's
have
the only
recaptured
race.
some
It's
of that
literally
in you go.
it's the only race in my peer career where I was running down the course thinking, "Man, I'm going to win this." That's the only race where I was
Usually when that you
truly
think
doubting.
that you don't win it, so
No,
you must have
no.
just kept like hanging in there and long
Yeah,
enough to
yeah,
yeah.
basically.
But that does
Yeah.
separate you because most people they think that and then it subconsciously or
Something
consciously,
snaps.
yeah, or
Yeah.
they just adjust and then it's this. But and they must have had the bit between the teeth that day as well because they kept
Mm,
attacking, and then it's a race. But you didn't give up, even if you
I
felt
had
like,
doubts.
yeah, it certainly
Yeah.
sounds like it.
Yeah.
On the eight in 2021, that knowing the eight, it is very much more than the sum of its parts kind of situation. And if it's not going well, no matter who's in the boat, it'll just be pulled apart. And so you can have a crew with eight good oarsmen that doesn't go well for any number of factors. And when it does go well, it's usually because it's been going well. So from not qualifying to then winning at the qualification and then going on to win, but from memory lost the heat, and so there
Yeah.
was reasons to doubt there too. But then the momentum must have been there for you guys to do what you did in the final.
Regroup. Yeah. I mean, the reality, in my opinion, our whole campaign was about 1,000 dominoes lined up. And we pushed the first one over, and every single one almost fell.
Yeah,
And if one didn't, then it would have been derailed. That's my opinion of it. We had new coach come in who was probably the right guy for the group of guys, so that's important. We had the COVID. Obviously, COVID was necessary for us because we had a 20-year-old and a 21-year-old in the crew, and if they didn't have that extra year, like they took a big step on, sort of thing. So many factors that if that particular scenario didn't go right, then it wouldn't have happened. I had to convince the selectors even to pick the boat because, um, or to get everyone for New Zealand rowing to put all their eggs in one basket was a
yeah.
massive leap. We'd always targeted small boats. So that was a massive leap that took, I guess, to a degree, had to leverage off my um, status, I guess, in the sport and lobby selectors and management that this was a
How
good
much is it
idea.
lobbying versus my ongoing participation is contingent on it being in this boat class?
No, it was more lobbying at that point
Yeah,
because I came back from cycling, and it wasn't a given. They were supportive, but I sort of got myself back towards the pointy end of the squad. But it was, yeah, convincing management to go all in, and then it's been spoken about. I guess I manipulated the squad somewhat to get the best guys involved in the eight,
yeah,
particularly the men's pair who
yeah.
were silver medalists at the 2019 World Championships. There was some manipulation there on my behalf to get them involved, and fortunately, it all
Encouragement,
worked out.
encouragement, or
Nah, more
No.
devious than
Yeah,
that.
okay, okay.
Yeah.
What does that look like?
Well, I've talked about it, so it's not particularly secretive, but well, we had Michael Brake and Tom Murray. They were the silver medalists in the pair. They were selected to go. They qualified and selected, or qualified to go to the Olympics. Everything, they were heading towards that 2020. But when obviously we came out of 2020 COVID lockdown sort of thing and started training with a revised date or target of 2021, obviously not super secure, but it's like, okay, we're working towards this. And they were having they weren't getting along particularly well. The boat wasn't going well. I had been injured. I did a rib fracture at the start of each of a couple of seasons there, just doing dumb stuff, trying to do too much too early in a old body. Um, and so I'd been out, but they hadn't been going particularly well. I was coming back from those injuries, and I think Tom Murray had an issue of some description. And it just so happened that we were on a similar time horizon, and okay, it makes sense for us to go rowing together. So we went rowing together, and we just we clicked. It was like Tom. People have said, it's something about rowing with Murray's, but Eric is a better athlete than Tom, out and out. He's a lot bigger, but rowing in terms of the easiest boat that I've gone fast in was probably with Tom Murray. And yeah, we just started obliterating everyone in the squad. We were hands down the fastest. I think we did like a 6:16 or something in a sort of pre-regatta at Carapio, so fast times.
Yeah.
And it just became that, in line with my reputation in the pier, basically put us as the top combination. And the selectors were very keen for me to do a pair with him, but I didn't have a huge motivation to do that. Partly been there, done that, but also partly, if I'm honest, fear of putting myself on the line with my record in the boat.
Yeah.
I don't admit that often, but that was a factor. And the 8 obviously gave me a whole lot of people to blame if it didn't go wrong. And
Yeah.
so anyway, we were the top combination, and I said to Michael Brake, who was the guy whose seat I'd ostensibly taken, I was like, oh look, your choice is either to race me for the pair and lose, and then you're in the 8, or you go in the 8 and I go in the 8 with you, and we convince Tom to come with us. That was basically his choice, and so it was a pretty shit situation I put him in.
Was that over a coffee or a beer or after training or a phone call or a?
Yeah, it kind of, it progressed, it developed. So it's sort of over the
Ongoing.
course.
Yeah.
Yeah, it became clear over a month or so that this combination was really clicking and could go places. And then, he was somewhat on the outer, and then we had, I can't remember. I don't know if I spelled it out to him super
Yeah.
explicitly, but it was.
He'd
It
have
was
to say the writing was on the wall.
Yeah, the writing was on the wall, and he spoke to some of people that have, I guess, older guys that have advised him somewhat, and they came to the conclusion, look, you'll probably go for the 8 last year. And
Yeah.
my logic, I felt bad. I didn't feel bad doing it. I would have felt bad if it didn't come off, and I felt like I cost them a medal in the pair. I think that would have been, I don't know how I didn't have to cross that bridge, but my logic for justifying it to myself was that I felt that the 8, they had a good chance of getting second or third, but they weren't going to beat the Sinkovic brothers.
Yeah.
So, whereas the 8 had been tracking really well, we've been rowing in pairs, we've been rowing in the 8, we've been mixing it up. And the 8, we were doing pretty well, and I thought, we have a chance. It made sense on paper, and that was, which I have put out that information. Like, it literally made sense on paper to me in terms of our erg scores and our ability. I think, we have the horsepower, we have the right environment, we have the right mental, like you say, so many facets. It made sense on paper. We had the right people involved. Everyone sort of got on. eventually everyone, I think a big part of it, eventually everyone felt as though they deserved their place in the boat.
Yeah.
Um, and had done something that they could hang their hat on throughout the season and be like, yeah, I deserve this spot, sort of thing. So all of those factors, and the reality was, it probably wasn't until 6 weeks out from the games that we I guess we chanced to a degree upon a rhythm as a group where we were like, okay, this is how we're going to row. We were in a good place. We'd qualified. I don't know why. We'd had a good week of training, and then it was our last training of the week, Saturday, and we were doing repeat 2Ks as a squad. And our main rival was the women's 8, who were world champions in 2019. And their top lineup, when they had Kerry Gowler and Grace Prendergast, multiple gold medalists, when they were in the 8, they would usually beat us by 1.5% to 2%. And then maybe when they weren't in the 8 and they were in the pair because they were doubling up, we'd be sort of about 1% behind usually.
Yeah.
But that particular session, everyone woke up on the right side of the bed, and I think we did 6 2K repeats, building rate from 26 up to close to race pace, or probably race pace last 500 or something like that. And we beat them on 5 out of 6 of the 2Ks with their top lineup. We're like, oh, there's something here. Yeah. So we really dialed in on and it was just that session. I think the fact that we started at a lower rate, we're able to really reef on it, attack. Because, it's been spoken about, but I sort of thought, I'll go on the 8, we'll get everyone to row how Eric and I did, and it should go well. And I don't know if it's because I couldn't get enough people to understand and buy into that it didn't work, or if it fundamentally didn't work. I think there's aspects of it that rubbed off on, because I was trying to push us down that route in terms of a philosophy and a way of rowing. And I think there's aspects of that we kept that are just good, like being smooth and harmonious and looking after boat speed. Like that's always a good philosophy across the board.
It usually helps.
So that's we always kept that, I think. But that particular session just being like way more aggressive than I would typically row. And as a group, I think, we just learned. I think the guys, some of the more experienced 8 rowers amongst the group, they would say they'd tried to push us along that way of rowing, and maybe I'd been a little bit, nah, you can't brute force a gold medal. You gotta do it with finesse. And I eventually had to retract and be like, okay, the 8 just requires a bit of brute force.
Yeah, especially from catch to finish.
Finesse, brute force, yeah. And I think, it's just the boat's going so fast. You've got to be so prepared and onto it at the front half of the stroke that if you're not, you miss it and you just don't add enough to the boat.
I was curious as to how it would go, knowing that you'd be a dominant feature in the boat, both on race day, but also in affecting how things went in the preparation, and knowing that the historical precedent for 8s that are leading early tend to go on and win. If you wanted to put your money on which 8's going to win, then you can pick it most of the time at the 500-meter mark. And in the pair, you guys tend to not come out slow, but you certainly weren't basing what you were doing on trying to get to the 500-meter first. You were trying to get there in good order in a way that you could go on with, which is a little different than the 8. So is this something that obviously you're aware of it, you're a student of the sport, so did you think, I'm going to have to do that differently? Was this something, it seems like you at least had a way of rowing, which is it means you're further ahead than a lot of crews. They just assume, we'll just try hard and do the training, but having an approach and trying to refine it, does this work? No, yeah. So you obviously thought about it coming in, and then it was challenged and evolved over time.
Yeah, I think I was always hammered home. There were guys who had been in the 8 for, they'd won a couple of under 23 8s, and had success in context, I guess. They hadn't won medals, but they'd had success given their age and stage, I suppose.
Yeah.
And they always hammered, oh, we've got to get out quicker at the start. We've got to be, fast. And so I took that, and I guess we had the experience. I had the experience in 2019 where we didn't qualify, and we had different strategies, different races, be it intentional or otherwise, how they panned out. And yes, by the time we got to training in 2021, I developed I still have a finesse focus, but I understand we have to get out of the blocks here, otherwise it's just all over.
Yeah.
So yeah, we were third in the final. We were third behind British and Germany to the 500.
Yeah.
Um, but not far back, like a
Yeah.
second tops.
Yeah.
And we genuinely, I think probably like every boat in that race, we had gone as fast as we could
Yeah.
to the 500. I
Yeah.
think that's all the eight is. You just go as fast as you possibly can to every marker. I think that's,
Yeah. And then try and wind. And then,
yeah,
yeah.
that's pretty
Yeah.
much it. So, we tried to go as fast as we could. And that third was, I think if we'd done a flat 500 as fast as we could, we would have struggled to beat the
Yeah.
Germans to the 500. They were just, however they do it,
I never know how they do it, given
they're
how they
not massive
row
power
and
guys.
not a lot
Yeah,
of power, but they were always
I
so
think
slick.
yeah, long oars, short inboard. I don't know,
Yeah.
leverage.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, yeah, so getting out fast. That wasn't something.
Yeah. No,
Definitely
that's
had
not where
to
the
learn it.
resistance was. Yeah. You're aware.
Nah,
Yeah. Yeah.
no, I think it was just generally, it's not like it was just more around a finesse versus attacking the shit out of it.
Yeah.
It's not like I was nitpicking little bits. It's more like a holistic starting point.
Yeah.
I suppose an overriding philosophy. That was more what I was trying to bring, which it didn't get wholesale turned on its head. So, but yeah, it became brute force as smoothly as we can.
Yeah. Yeah. Which it pretty much captures, I think, what you should be
Yeah,
trying to, you can't, it can't be either. If it's just
no,
feel, it won't work. And if it's just
yeah,
force, it won't work either. And the
yeah,
challenge in the eight is for it to go well, you're going to have people that have done well in different situations, different periods
mm,
of time. And you want to make the most of that experience, but you can't have 8 or 9 or 10
different.
captains. And
No,
then you need to consolidate to something that's really simple and then have everyone approach that in the same way. And all of that
mm.
is easier said than done.
Yeah, I don't. I think I led facets of that amongst the group, but I also would, like I didn't dominate every conversation by any means. Like I was happy to sit back and let
Yeah.
everyone add their 2 cents, because if everyone doesn't have buy-in, then it's not going to go anywhere. So, um,
Did you ever have guys that would pipe in though that, you'd say you have a couple of guys and they'd say a thing or two and you're like, we're on the same page, and then they'd have some guy that then says something and it's like, that ain't it. And
yeah,
then
those
that,
those yeah niggly post road talks.
yeah, and I found that in eights, it's often a lack of that when things tend to go well.
Oh, a lack of
Yeah, like
post road talks.
well, no, you basically need a couple of guys that leading the group and have a clear idea of how it should go. And then there might be guys that chime in occasionally on standards but
Mm,
it can't be everyone. And you
yeah,
can't have someone else that is coming out of that left of center that when so for example, I remember with our Beijing 4, well enough those guys. Well, we were in the 4, didn't qualify, so then they had to go to the Regatta of Death
yeah,
in 2008. They won Lucerne, they won that, even though Matt Ryan had Gastro, the silver in Beijing, and they had 3 technical cues, and it wasn't if that ain't it, it's not. Then we're not thinking about it,
yeah,
And I remember one was hold the finish, and this is
yeah,
basic technical stuff, and because it could be 100 different things, and they could all be right, but if that won't work, so it has to unify.
yeah.
And when you've got
Keep it
more people
simple.
in the 8, then there's more risk for that to happen.
Yeah, I don't think we had any. like simple. I mean, I guess we did have simple calls in it. To be honest, I can't even remember what they are.
Yeah.
But yeah, everyone eventually bought in. And like you say, there were people who sat back a little bit more. And I think it was just people led different areas, I
Yeah.
suppose.
Yeah.
You know, we had one guy who was a bit of a stickler for stat. Like, I'm a bit easier as the old turn up. If we're 5 minutes late on getting water, who gives a shit? But like, this guy was like, no, you're not here.
Yeah.
We're getting a
Yeah.
drink bottle when you're, yeah, but I just go grab my bottle
Yeah.
whenever people trying to, and he hated this shit. Like, you had,
That
was
would
not
yeah,
happy
that
with
would give
that.
me that would give me the shits.
Not like that
And
guy.
mostly coming from an eight background because there's just more risk for more of that when it's in a pair. I
Yeah,
don't care as much. And then that
yeah.
was most of what
Yeah,
your normal
that was
was.
your experience. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I was pretty loose on that sort of thing. And yeah, we had one guy, Tom McIntosh, who's the captain of the Oxford boat
Oxford.
race team
Yeah.
this year. Like, he was he was probably 23 when we were in the eight. But he sort of took on the sort of leadership chairman role, I guess. You know, like, he
Hmm.
was captain enthusiasm,
Yeah.
captain positivity. You
Yeah.
know,
Yeah. Okay.
which was quite a big thing at that age to sort of step up and take that mantle.
Yeah.
Like, he took quite a leadership role, and yeah, everyone
It's
sort
probably
of
why is
I
the boat race
boat race
president
captain.
without
Yeah,
having
no
set foot on the
experience.
canvas. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, no, that's his I guess competitive advantage. And yeah, I think my biggest thing was, I think, just changing people's expectations of themselves. That
Yeah.
was what I saw. So, and mainly from a performance point of view, and I put that out there by um, probably the I tried to have a reality check because things weren't tracking particularly well, but it came around. Just, and it's like, okay, ergs don't float, but they are a metric, and it's a standard,
Yeah.
and it's something that you can, determine line in the sand. So I contacted Matt Langridge. I'm going to out him. I've never said his name before, but he gave me all the GB teams rowing scores or 2K scores and body weights from the Rio Olympics, where they won the eight. And I took that data and sort of reverse engineered this straight line in the body to weight concept two calculator. Um, I can't remember how I did it, but I did it. And that basically gave for them, for their crew, their body, it gave you a line. Okay, where's my body weight? Oh, I have to be this
Sure.
fast to
Yeah.
be in the Rio GB8.
Yeah. Of the
So my
standard.
logic was, yeah. So I'm like, if you're not below this line,
Yeah.
like, this is obviously the standard to win a
Yeah.
gold medal in the eight. Well, it was 4 years ago. If you're not below this line, you're basically expecting someone to carry you
Yeah.
to a gold medal
Or
in
the
terms
standard
of,
to be less 5 years later,
yeah,
and the standard's lower, which is not something you
yeah,
can plan for.
no, no.
No.
And so I basically put it, and it was just a reality check because we'd had, I guess, guys that were just, I don't know, I guess they just expected to turn up on race day and be 110%, which
Yeah.
just never happens
No.
unless you've done sort of had those, like 5 key sessions where you've gone about, really performed
Mm.
well throughout the year and just given yourself some belief, I
Yeah.
guess.
Yeah.
And that you turned up, because there's always moments throughout the season where you're required to turn up and to put in a good performance, and it doesn't matter that you're not feeling good that day. You have to do it now,
Yeah. Yeah.
and that's a skill, I
That's
think. And
sport. That's the
yeah,
main, that's
yeah,
the thing, because it's on
yeah,
a date. It's not when you feel good about it. It's on, this is
no,
the agreed upon date.
yeah. So getting that expectation of guys that, okay, we're not just going to phone in scores. We have to turn up, and there's going to be sessions where you're on the line and that sort of thing. So we ended up being, I think, on average, we were 2 seconds faster than the British eight on
Okay.
that power to weight adjusted.
Yeah.
So
You either
yeah,
then need to go, here's what I've noticed statistically, and
yeah,
here's where we should be and here's where you are, or
Yeah.
in the end, it's either increased power or decreased body weight or both. And so, which version of that did you do?
I left it for each individual to take as they may.
Yeah,
Um,
sure, sure, sure.
if
Here's what
they
I've
thought, if
noticed.
they,
Yeah,
yeah, if
I'm
they
going to
look in
be
the mirror,
here.
yeah,
Yeah,
yeah. So this is going to be me, or I'm
yeah,
going to be down.
yeah,
I'm going to aim to be here below the line.
yeah,
Um, if you look in the mirror and think I could probably lose a couple of kilos, and that might help you on this graph, then
yeah,
that's your decision. But yeah, largely it was just about accountability, I think,
yeah.
for your own performance. And it's I don't know if other guy if it had a huge effect, but it was just all those small things adding
Was
up,
your
which is always the way to know.
5:43 that year, or was it
Yeah,
in
yeah.
Rio or earlier? Then
No,
5:40.
it
Yeah,
was it was my I did 5:43 in lockdown in my garage in 2020. So it was
yeah,
the year before. I did 5:45
yeah,
in 2021.
yeah,
So I guess with my PB, we'd literally had 6 weeks of specific
yeah,
preparation. So
yeah,
if you're going to do a PB, that's probably it. So I was a couple of seconds
yeah,
slower in the next year, but that
yeah.
sort of
In the
ballpark.
ballpark. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
When yeah, you and I had talked about this, but it's also well known, it was written about it. Your relationship with Dick Tonks was tenuous at times, and for those that aren't fully abreast, your coach who had coached a lot of Olympic gold medalists in New Zealand, and so was held in some esteem of having success with the crews, but wasn't the warmest personality. And you guys had reached a point after some achieving some success that things were on a bit of a tightrope. So I wouldn't say that's like optimal in terms of how to have a coach athlete relationship, but I'm thinking about when did things not go well that weren't that? When another example would be when you tried to drop weight too aggressively for cycling, and sometimes when you'd come back too aggressively and accumulated rib injuries. When else do you think, oh, that didn't work? And if I could avoid someone else like me doing that in the future, what comes to mind?
yeah. I think the coach situation was particularly unique. I mean, there's not many personalities like Dick Tonk, so I don't think that
Yeah.
I could train someone or suggest something around that.
No, it'd be hard to avoid because it's sort of only by the time you're there was
Yeah,
it. Yeah.
that you're there.
Yeah.
Uh, yeah, I mean, I don't, we got to a point where I didn't think he respected us as rowers. I mean, he went off his rocker at us and called us blonde-headed, arrogant motherfucking cunts and screamed to the house
Yeah.
down at it. Just various things.
Yeah.
And then we were made to grovel and apologize to him as though we'd done something wrong.
Yeah.
Stuff that just would not happen probably in the current climate, just more of that sort of I don't know when the date was,
I mean,
but when
we had a bit of that too. So that
I'm
was,
sure you did.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
I think every
Mind you,
high
I
performance
wasn't a
system.
world champion though, so
Yeah.
it does change the
Anyway,
dynamic a little bit.
yeah. I mean, it was what it was.
Yeah.
And there's no point. Like, if
Yeah,
anyone
no,
wants
no.
more
Yeah,
information on that,
I
you
think
can.
that's less something that we can leverage than, more body
Yes. Yeah.
management
Yeah.
and
Things are in my control
exactly.
entirely. Yeah. I think, yeah, you need to be smart around injuries. And like, that's me preaching from the pulpit and not not drinking my own Kool-Aid, to be honest, because that's not what I've done. Um, it's knowing the difference between, and it takes time knowing the difference between a niggle and something that's going to lead to injury. And that's a rib thing for me, like knowing, like as an elite rower, you're always going to feel a bit sore and a bit tired, and things aren't going to be perfect. It's once in a blue moon where you actually feel amazing. Um,
Almost never.
so, yeah, almost never. I would
Yeah.
say probably never.
I'd feel like
Um,
you'd think you'd feel good during a taper, and then you kind of just feel like fat and lethargic, and you're like, "What is
yeah,
this
yeah,
sport?"
yeah. And then no, you're almost never feeling
No,
good.
yeah,
But then knowing, oh, okay, that's different. Like that's something that needs to be rested. Because in my experience, you just cannot there's only one time in my career where I rode through a rib fracture and dealt with it and
Yeah.
sort of got better. And that was a Dick Tonk story, in that we were probably 2 weeks out from world champs in Switzerland,
Yeah.
and I'd had about 5 days out of the boat, and I said, I think I just need a couple more, and he said, well, if you're not in the boat, you may as well go home. So then I
Yeah.
went. I don't
Yeah.
know how many people have resorted to the big crepe bandage right around the torso.
Yeah.
Basically, that's was where I was at. Is going to the physio early in the morning, and he was crepe bandaging up my whole rib cage to
Not a
give a
lot
bit
you
more
could
stability.
have done then at that stage either though.
Nah,
No.
nah, but it worked. And
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
don't
I
know,
mean,
maybe that's some Dick Tonk's wisdom.
it
Yeah,
worked. It worked.
yeah, it worked
Yeah.
in that we won.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, yeah, so I think definitely taking a step back at times is, yeah, it's just so many things that I never did. Like understanding that, okay, couple of days not training or modified training here is not going to necessarily be, that's is not going to be the determining factor in 3 months' time. Again, like these are just things that I really struggled with mentally. Um, and what
Do you
was
feel
the other
like
thing
that's
you
better
mentioned?
now that you um
Yeah, I think so. But there's less riding on. There was less riding on my stuff later on.
yeah.
I definitely with my rib fractures when I was in the eight, I wasn't in a good mental. I was pretty frustrated by that,
Yeah.
and that was when I found the assault bike. I'm
Yeah.
pretty sure that was off the back of you
I'll claim it.
talking about it and
Yeah.
using it. Yeah, no, I think no, I'm not even. I'm 100% sure that's where I got that from.
Yeah.
And I still would rate that machine as the go-to if I had 30 minutes to get some work done. Um,
Yeah.
and um, yeah, I think mentally it's always a challenge as an athlete with an injury, but you just have to realize it's going to take time, and it does take time. And with those ones, we had quite a good, well, a very good physiologist at that time, and she was set me strict protocol of a gradual return, which was really conservative. If I felt it at all, straight back, week, another week. Like if I
Did
felt,
you and you would do that?
yeah, I did
Yeah.
eventually because it
Yeah.
got to the point. Whereas if I don't get it right and do it right this time,
Yeah.
it's going to be too late, sort of
Yeah.
thing. Um,
I remember
so
you did
eventually
you
I
ever
did.
have for a rib doing the, like do a push up, a sit up
Yeah,
as
they
a
had those.
diagnostic, you sort of
Yeah,
track how it's going. And I remember I don't want to call him out, but I will say Olympic medalist, Australian rowing team, recurrent rib injury is very common, that he was doing, like 30, just a single push
oh,
up, a single.
trying to
Yeah,
find the
yeah, and
pain.
also like, is it still in pain? Like maybe if it's not in pain when I do this test now, I can row this afternoon, and that
Yeah,
being the whole day, enough that it would be aggravating the underlying issue, such as the.
yeah,
And I was far that made I discourage that, but then that would be the sort of thing I would do too. I was like, can I get back in the boat as soon as possible, please?
yes, yeah. I
Yeah,
think, and most athletes are like that. But yeah, I eventually did follow that
yeah,
return to rowing sort
yeah.
of protocol that we had.
And do you
Uh,
think if you would, this is one of those, if you'd had your time again, that you would just be more patient with these from the start, for the whole career?
yeah, I think I certainly could have been, but it's again, it's just it's time and place as
Yeah,
well. You know that
yeah,
I wasn't
yeah,
later on. I wasn't coached by Dick Tonks with this overriding sense of probably shame and guilt if I'm not out there and
yeah,
all sorts of that. Yeah, like I had an understanding coach who, yeah. So
yeah,
it's very much time and place. But if you can err on that side, just yeah, if you understand, okay, it's this rib injury should not be the make or break of my career. If I give it time to heal, if I'm going to be good and going to be a champion, I'll be one regardless. But
yeah.
I'd say 9 times out of 10, the conservative route is probably the right route with a rib.
And we're mostly talking about coming back from injury, but what do you think now in terms, like knowing all that you do about preventing it, other than load management, which is seems to have probably been the underlying factor in most of your rib injuries, which is the persistent sort of reoccurrence over your time. Um, you guys famously, and we touched on this earlier, stopped doing weights at least for a cycle. I
Yeah.
would agree with you that the gym strength and rowing performance are not strongly correlated, but there is something to be said for its ability to increase durability and so to reduce injury risk, as is stuff like, mobility, yoga, activation. There's a lot you could do there, given your long and varied career and that you're still training 6 times a week, which by most measures is pretty good clip. So, and you don't want to get injured, the costs now are even higher. So, or at least as high, because recovery is shorter, you got less time with which to actually do anything about
Focus.
it. No one cares. So what do you think people need to know in terms of preventing injury that isn't just be wary of how much you're training, the types of training you're doing?
Yeah, I think one thing it's important if you're changing modality, do it gradually. So that could be coming back from a break, like our off season. We used to have most of a month to ourselves after World Champs. When you come back, build it up slowly. Don't go straight to 7 times or 6 days a week rowing
How
big
much
Ks.
that month, what would you do typically?
It varied between the person, but I'd generally have a couple of weeks of doing not much, then
Yeah,
start to feel pretty
yeah,
seedy and
yeah,
shit, and then
yeah.
start riding a bike and just doing some fitness. I
But
wouldn't
you
row
but you
or
would stop for at least a couple
yeah,
of weeks usually.
yeah,
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 usually, yeah. Um,
yeah.
and then and yeah, if you wanted to be, I probably didn't need to do that. I probably could have kept tapping it over, but um,
I think
yeah, I
when it
think
goes well, which it usually did for you, you can sort of,
yeah,
it's easy to put the tools down, but
yeah,
that was less my experience. And so I was sort of immediately
straight back
back
into
in
it.
there. And yeah, almost like it just rolled through. And
Yeah,
I don't think that's great either. I think it's better to
no,
actually feel a little
have
bit
a be
seated, detrained, and
have a bit of a
be,
reset.
yeah.
Yeah, so if you're changing modality, that could also be from sculling to sweeping. Like you can't do that on a, well, I struggle to do that on a dime. Like
So
you
would you say do
gradually,
less volume on the water if you were,
yeah, if you're switching from sweeping to sculling, which we did on occasion, don't go, okay, I'm 6 days a week, 2 times a day or whatever. At 10 sessions, say you're doing 10 sessions a week, go 8-2,
yeah,
then 6-4, and then 5-5 over the course of 3 weeks or something. And then,
yeah.
do it over a 3 week period where you change from one to the other
So everything
because you've got,
gradually.
yeah, I think so. Because you've got the heart and lungs, obviously, to
Yeah,
push hard in the single straight away, but it's different. Like you've slightly different way of the load going through your body.
yeah,
So that was, I guess I could say two of my two stress fractures when I was in the eight. One was Eric and I always trained, or a lot of the time trained on the dynamic concept too.
yeah,
So
yeah,
we felt that quite good for.
yeah. I died.
Um, yeah, we found that quite good for what we did in the pier, and then in the eight, we were using the static far more, static concept too. And I was out of town training somewhere. They had a dynamic. I was like, jump on that, boom, full bore, I don't know, 20K erg, something like that. And the dynamic loads quite a lot at the front, at the catch, and, pinged
That was enough.
did rib damage, and that was enough. And that put me out of the boat for 2 months, probably more. And then same thing.
2 months is like a long time when you're in season. That every day
Yeah,
is notable.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
And then same thing in 20, and I think Olympic year 2021, we were going to do a block in singles, and I came back and old dog, I can row a single. I'm
yeah,
going to be the fastest single here.
yeah,
Boom, straight out the gates,
yeah, yeah,
leading the pack,
yeah.
and he's probably, I don't know, it was 16, 20K row, something like that. And coming back, I'm like, oh, That don't feel good.
Yeah, shit.
Yeah, there's another 2 or 3 months. So, but just yeah, just not taking those just baby steps, getting a bit of conditioning under my belt. That was my rib issue. So, in terms of ways to alleviate it, obviously do change gradually between modalities, and then yeah, I think there's definite value in weight. I would say for me, the weight training and rowing was more about just being more generally conditioned athlete than anything that it gave to
Yeah,
me as an athlete, I suppose.
yeah,
Um, and they were certainly useful. So that whole when I had rib issues, one thing I found worked for me after every session, I do a set of press ups, and that's
okay,
something anyone can do. So
yeah,
if you're not, and that, I think that alleviated a lot of that balance that you would have got from being in the gym and doing a press exercise of some description. We weren't doing that because we weren't doing gym work.
yeah,
But every time I get off the water, I do 20, 2 sets of 20 or 20 press ups, something like that. And that
something,
just something just to
yeah,
counterbalance the fact that I'd been pulling and hunched over and doing
yeah,
that the whole time, something
yeah,
to bend yourself back the other way. And yeah, I think once I don't recall having a rib injury whilst doing that
yeah.
simple thing. So I think if you're doing a weight training, and then yeah, thirdly, yeah, like you say, eating appropriately, fueling enough, you're always going to be at risk of injury if you're calorie deficient.
I think just for young listeners in particular, it really doesn't matter how much you're eating. If it needs to be more than what you're eating, that's simply what it needs to be. And there's
Mm,
ways to make that more palatable. But that for a lot of people, especially if they're doing a lot of oarsmen, oarswomen, if they're doing a lot of training and they're of a certain body type, it wasn't hard for me to keep weight on, but it certainly was for some of my teammates. And then they could be eating more than me and then feel like, why do I have to eat? It doesn't matter. That's what you
that's it.
simply need to do, and that your appetite isn't super relevant. Um, Again, there's ways you can increase your appetite, but that's simply something that you can't rely on as a good indicator of how much you should be eating. I remember
No,
reading a book once that it was basically said that it was about training thoroughbred racehorses. And the author was saying that if a horse isn't a good eater, they basically won't be a good racehorse because they won't be able to eat enough to sustain the training. And I thought, gee, that has to apply pretty closely with
for
rowers
athletes.
too.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah. No, that makes sense. And yeah, I think that is accurate.
cool. There's
You got to
a,
see food is fuel. It's not there
yeah,
for at a certain point. It's not there for fun.
yeah. And were you conscious of eating well or eating enough or eating what works for you or some version of all of those?
Yeah, it developed over time, but I think I was always pretty like I had a degree of understanding around nutrition. I sort of knew my macros and potentially what I wasn't measuring them, but I kind of knew volumes that I should be consuming,
Yeah.
and generally putting on weight wasn't. If I was in full training, it wasn't. I
No,
wasn't worried about
yeah.
gaining weight. I was purely worried about fueling appropriately for training and yeah, holding weight, I suppose. So I was of that body type, and
That's
yeah,
where
it
you want to
was
be as well, just for everyone, for the most part. Your body wants to be the size it wants to be, and you can extract more performance out of it. But if you're trying to shift it, there has to be a reason because that's going to come with a cost.
mm, yeah,
That's in my
yeah,
opinion, anyway. That's someone who spent a lot of the time I was rowing trying to stay down because my natural size is probably around now, which is like 105 at 6'1", not the
yeah.
ideal rowing frame.
Nah,
So I was
we didn't
like,
call you Sam Block.
be
We didn't call you Sam Block the block for no reason.
yeah, yeah, yeah. Well, and that was me trying my darndest to not be blockish. I
Yeah,
remember Brian Richardson saying to Frank Hegarty and myself, because he's a similar build,
he's
and he was like, "Can you guys, basically just be? We want you as fine as possible." We're like, great. So he and I were both walking
Yeah,
like 3 hours a day on top of training and doing all sorts of stuff just to keep our weight down, which is not ideal. And I
I've
probably
done it
would
differently.
I would
Yeah,
have gone somewhere in the middle
yeah,
realistically, as opposed to trying to keep my weight down. I would have done
yeah.
less
Bang a
dramatic.
square peg into a round hole.
Yeah, yeah. Um, I want to know who the biggest freaks or specimens that you've trained with I mean, I know you had some overlap with Rob Waddell, former 2K world record holder for the longest time. That would have to be high on that list. Who else? And Eric, who else? I mean, it's going to be a long list of people. I'm also curious in the America's Cup and guys that you would have ridden with.
Yeah, yeah. I guess we'll finish up on the freak note. Yeah, the Rob is first and foremost. I mean, to my mind, the best physical specimen to have ever rode. I think. Um, like I fully respect what uh, Josh Dunkley Smith did for his 2K, but I think if Rob focused on that and really honed in and saw value in lowering the 2K record, I think that would have been lower.
Okay.
I
I
saw
think
him
Josh
do
could have
that.
gone quite a bit faster too. So I'm
Possibly.
curious.
Yeah, yeah. Like
Yeah,
I don't know. I saw him do his, and Josh was probably the same, but I saw him do his 5:36 when he came back from sailing. I think it was 5:36, and yeah, he did it. Three big breaths, got up, walked off. Like it was not
yeah. It's not just what someone
a
does, but
collapse.
how they do it.
Yeah. So there's that. I did hear. So I have no proof, and no, this is not from the horse's mouth, but it's from a very close source that when he first came back after sailing and was still quite heavy, I heard he did a 109 for 500. So I don't, you have far more experience in that of whether that's because what's Phil Clapp's record?
119, 109.6, I think.
Okay. So yeah, I mean okay.
The
So I mean
Leo Young was 110. That was the record.
okay, that was the one. Okay.
110.5 was the record
Okay.
for
So yeah, I mean
25
it's
years.
easily possible that Rob did 109. Easily possible.
Yeah.
Had like 100 and given his aerobic and then coming out at 110. So
100.
I actually thought the record was more like 111. So that's why I was like, oh, 2 seconds faster. I thought my source was talking shit, but
Yeah, no, it was
now that you
110.
say
And he, I
110 was
think,
the
got up
thing.
to 120 kilos. I remember, again, secondhand was an article when he was sailing, and
Yeah.
they didn't have the limit on body weights that
No.
you guys did in the catamaran. So, big boy.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So okay, yeah. So Rob, yeah, I think he probably did do 109 then. And yeah, Eric was very impressive in his long stuff. I think he's got. I'd say his most impressive one is the 10K world record he has. I think,
Still
which
has it.
is yeah, still has it. I'm pretty sure, and it's like 132 splits. So Ollie Zeidler, I think, has broken the half-hour record, but Eric still has faster splits for a 10K, which is longer than the 30
I think
minutes.
Tom George
So,
is in and around there for the 30-minute as well.
yeah, he probably is, given how
Yeah.
fast what he do 5K in a ridiculous fast time.
Yeah. And his 2K is 39. So
Yeah,
he's,
yeah, yeah. So he's obviously capable of that sort of thing as
yeah.
well.
Yeah.
So yeah, out and out ergs. Other freaks
Was there any guys more recently after Eric?
like not
Well, also I want to know guys like the body weight makes a difference. So there's guys
good
around
white
90
guys.
kilos that have,
Yeah,
43
uh,
at 90 kilos to 543 at 90 kilos to me is more
it's up there.
impressive than Rob, yeah, at 38 or 30, but 36 is
Yeah,
like it's right in that same ballpark.
yeah. Um, no, I don't know. Don't. Tom McIntosh has a very good power to weight 5K, and
Okay.
he'll tell you about it.
That you won't. Oh, he will. Okay, he knows where he stands.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
That's his. If there's any argument, it'll come down to who has the best powder weight 5K,
Yeah.
which
Yeah.
one might not argue as,
Oh, you take the wins where you can get them. That's
yeah, you take
okay.
one away.
I
That's where it
realized
gets
when
what
I
they
couldn't
aim
win
for.
the out and out 2K, I was like, oh, it's a powder weight sport. Like that's where
Yeah,
I'll hang
max
my
split,
hat. Well,
lower split.
yeah, that I just basically stopped paying attention to that because I was like, I can win. I could be
Yeah,
stronger than anyone, and then that doesn't matter in the one thing that we happen to be doing.
yeah. Like we had strong guys in the gym. I think like Michael Brake, who I knocked out of here. I think he's a sort of 200 kilo deadlift kind of guy,
Yeah,
which is when you're in a rowing training
yeah,
context is I think pretty strong.
yeah.
And yeah, Cam Webster, who was on the periphery of the team, he's a super powerful guy that I suggested trial for the America's Cup, and he got a spot, and he's a sort of like 2,200, 2,300 watts on a bike, just got
Mhm.
a kick like a mule sort of thing, can clean 160 kilos, just
Okay,
like
yeah, yeah.
decent,
That's strong.
like, yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah, decently strong dude. Um, yeah, so I mean, yeah, I think Rob and Eric really.
Yeah.
Eric in terms of long distance stuff, but then he's there's a couple of his records like Conlon McKay beat his hour record, which I'm sure he was pretty devastated by.
Yeah.
Uh,
He's a big
and
boy.
yeah, Conlon.
Yeah, I reckon the longer the distance, the more that
Just leaning
extra.
on it.
Yeah, yeah. And if you're 200 plus centimeters, every stroke is going to
It adds
be.
up.
Yeah, exactly. I
Yeah.
think that's the case at all distances. That's just definitely not going in my favor. It's like I'm going to have to take more strokes or apply more force in the shorter
Yeah.
stroke. They're your options.
Yeah. No, definitely Rob and Eric,
Yeah.
I think, are the names that people all recognize. And
Yeah, it would basically only be if there are any sleepers because those two is both well known and all time.
yeah,
Yeah.
not anyone that I can think of that's out and out going to
Yeah.
blow anyone's mind.
Cool. Um, I really appreciate your time, and it's a conversation I'd hope to have, mostly coming from a place of what are the things that I want to know, because this is all extremely interesting to me, and I think a lot of people will have benefited from the chat we've had. Um, I think I'm ultimately trying to help people figure out what works for them because we're all a bit different, different goals, different ages, injury history, kids, no kids, job, like all of the variables and different. You've got to figure out what works for you. So if I can help people figure out works for them, um, that's a net positive. And so I wonder to finish off if there's anything that comes to mind from your experience that you think, oh, yeah, this might be something. And we've talked about an awful lot of those things. I just want to know if there's anything we haven't touched on that might be useful.
Um, I think ultimately, I think it's a little cliche, I guess, but persistence and consistency will outweigh talent in the long run, I
Yeah.
suppose. So if you are someone who is not traditionally the most talented person, then you, in a I guess a rowing sense or a sporting sense, then you can train your way to a decent career, I
Yeah.
suppose.
Yeah.
I'm in two minds. I'm not someone who I feel as though was particularly talented. I feel as though I trained or got the most out of the talent that I have. Um, and then others would argue that I did have a lot of talent, but yeah, to me, I think a huge amount of it was just consistency over
Yeah.
time,
So
like
your
consistency over time.
ability is largely based on your persistence, which is consistency over time.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah. Especially in a sports you've done, the workhorse sports where the
yeah,
time invested over time tends to pay great
yeah,
dividends. And
Yeah.
it might be, I think everyone could listen to that and go, well, yeah, we all know that, but that has to show up on a
There's
day-to-day
no
basis.
shortcut. That's I There's always, well, not always, but kids messaging me for some secret elixir of success on Instagram, and often
Yeah.
I don't reply because there is no set. Or if I do, it's pretty simple that there is no secret. In my mind, I never saw a secret.
Yeah.
Um, so you just got to keep batting away.
Especially in rowing.
More steady state. That's the
Yeah.
secret.
More
Just
states.
to just to trigger people.
Yeah, yeah. I reckon that with say in soccer or basketball, you can be really talented and
Oh, sure.
you
Different
don't
sport.
right. But in rowing, there's no way to be good at it without doing a hell of a lot of work.
No.
And
The talent in rowing is being able to turn up. I think that's the same with most endurance sports. If you don't have the talent and the ability to turn up day in day out, you won't be.
yeah,
If you're struggling with that, then something has to change drastically,
yeah.
or maybe find something else.
That's why
I'm
that
going,
question, how do you stay motivated when you're like, I never thought about it.
yeah. If
That's
you have
like,
to ask that question,
yeah, might not be for
it's
you, and
already
that's
we're
okay.
already we're
Yeah,
already done.
yeah, 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 yeah. That's not easy to say in a DM
No,
though. Like, hey, it's not for you,
you got
just
to come
based
up with
on
some other answer
yeah, you've
because
already
you
revealed
don't want
yourself.
to hear that.
Yeah, okay. Um, Hamish, appreciate it, mate. I think this is going to be episode 1, and thank you for your time. And let's do it again when you're a little further down your
Yeah, yeah,
next adventure.
all good.
All right,
Cool.
thanks,
Cheers.
mate.
Bye bye.
Oh, I'll just stop it.